alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm your host, the ever-demented Tim Niederreiter, coming to you from the Green Valley of southern Minnesota. And I am still alive somehow after staying up all night. But hey, with me today is a wonderful guest, a returning champion, the mighty J. Daniels Sawyer. Welcome back. He's the author of...
Thank you.
The Heinlein Juvenile... what? Secrets of the Heinlein Juvenile? Is there another
most
title
recently, Secrets of the Heinlein Juvenile and Robert's Rules of Writing. Before that, 30-odd books and short story collections and all sorts of other stuff. I write science fiction, fantasy, mystery, and nonfiction, and currently releasing The Wolf of Venus at venuswolf.substack.com. It is a wonderfully dark, chewy, hard-ass young adult adventure story set on a half-terraformed Venus in the middle of a race war.
Oh, boy.
And, yeah. And that's doing pretty well. So you can check that out, get the first few chapters for free over at venuswolf.substack.com.
Nice. So how's Substack treating you? I'm just curious, because I've not really heard many people talk about how it works with fiction.
Well, this is my first attempt with fiction, and it's doing not as well as I hoped, much better than I feared. So that means that I'm going to actually do the whole book on it, and I may do the next one after that. It's not a next book in a series, just another fiction book after that. For nonfiction, it's been doing really well. I have a nonfiction, jdanielsawyer.substack.com, where I'm basically roughing out a new nonfiction book where I go through the historical, economic, demographic, and geopolitical roots of the current world crisis. And then at a certain point, which was the last column, I'm starting to spin off the possible futures of where we go from here. So that it's basically like an informational book, because I've been a geek about all this stuff since birth. I mean, I grew up in a late-stage Cold War. I watched the Berlin Wall fall when I was 12, and I was in the room with like a Stanford history professor at the time. And so this stuff is in my blood, and it forms the baseline of a lot of what I do in my science fiction work. And as we got closer and closer to the current crisis, which is a puck I've been skating towards in my personal life for 20 years, I expected this all to happen this year. Actually, to be fair, I expected it to happen next year, but the plague moved things up a bit.
A little bit of an acceleration. God.
Right, and the closer we got to this, the more I noticed that nobody else saw this coming. And so I started doing this Substack to try to get my friends on the same page, and attracted quite a few more than my friends. And now we're at the point where it's like, okay, so now we know why the old world is collapsing. What does the new world have in store for us?
Yeah, that's a scary thought, in my opinion. But anyway... there's obviously, you can go, I mean, I don't know a whole ton about this sort of thing, and I'm not going to be talking about it today, that's for damn sure. So,
check out the Substack, you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. You already gave him the link, so check out the Substack, folks. Go find it. Because we got somebody who's very knowledgeable about such matters on the show, and that's
and for everything else I do, go to jdsawyer.net. That's my website. You'll find old blog entries. You'll find a lot of fiction podcasts, nonfiction podcasts. I do a daily nonfiction podcast called The Everyday Novelist at everydaynovelist.com. I'm all over the place.
Usually we save the pimpage for the end of the show, but hey, put it up front. Okay, that's fine. And actually, I've got to say, I'm actually doing a daily podcast now too, at least on weekdays. Yeah.
Really? Dude.
Yeah.
Is it this one or is it another one?
No, it's a different one. It's called The Warm Up. That's on my Patreon right now, but it's free. It's a free, every post is unlocked for that series. And
check that out.
And it's just me doing my warm up before I dictate in the morning. and then for people who pay me money, they get to actually hear the raw dictation. For like $2 a month.
So are you like doing vocal warm-ups like la 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 la?
No. I'm babbling like an incoherent madman. I mean, I recorded the one for today. So it's not that different from what I'm doing here, except I'm all alone, usually.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
It is actually kind of fun, and I like doing it. Often I'm walking around, so the audio quality isn't that great. I'll do that one on the mobile, and then plug it right in, because I just can't. I mean, because the idea is not to sit in front of a computer and dictate. When I'm making fiction, right. I pace around a room or I walk outside, and so or now I'm trying one other thing, because I thought my typing speed did go up when I wasn't worrying about what I actually put on the page. So what if I turn the computer around and use the laptop around and use an external keyboard to type without being able to see the screen?
That's fun. That works.
I'm gonna try that. I haven't tried it yet. I was gonna do it, and then I got a little anxious about my upcoming sabbatical, and the podcast needed recording. So anyway, here we are. God. Okay. So anyway, Dan, the Wolf of Venus sounds fascinating, and I gotta say, is it another one in the vein of the Heinlein Juvenile kind of format?
Yes, indeed it is. Okay. Yep. My first book like that was Hadrian's Flight, which is a spy thriller with a 16-year-old protagonist set in the First Interplanetary War. These grew out, and I want to be doing one a year, but I've been in the midst of this long interstate house move that's really derailed me this year. But the Heinlein Juveniles are a series of books that Robert Heinlein did in the 1950s that I grew up on, have a deep love for, and I discovered as an adult that everybody had read these books, at least everybody over 30, or I guess now over 35.
I've read a bunch of them. I read a bunch of them, and I'm just barely over 30. Yeah.
And that shocked me, because these are books from way back in the early 50s. They were little niche science fiction books. No one should know about them, but everybody does. And I got interested in how Heinlein pulled that off. And so I started studying them, and I cracked the formula. There's actually a formula that he developed for writing books like this, and there's some deep cultural reasons that they have, and by deep culture I mean back to ancient Sumer, right, that they have the kind of lasting resonance that they do. And so I wrote Hadrian's Flight to try to see if I could do it, if it was something that anyone could, if anyone could pick up the format and do it, or if it was just Heinlein doing this format that made it work. And it worked. In fact, I got one of Heinlein's friends, when he was alive, read the book, and he gave me a blurb on the cover. It says what Heinlein would be writing, he was writing today, which was great.
Oh, that's badass. I didn't know about that quote. Jeez.
Yeah.
Impressive.
Sheldon MacArthur, he founded Westwood Books, or the Mystery Bookstore in Westwood, California. So once I'd done that, I was like, I've got to tell people about this, because this is this is the age of Twilight as young adult fiction. I'm like, young adult fiction sucks. We need real, good novels written for kids that gives them the sort of mythopoetic nutrition that they need and all the adventure that they crave. So I wrote Secrets of the Heinlein Juvenile, which broke this down, and then I wrote Wolf of Venus as my next entry, and I figure it's my way of paying it forward to the next generation to write books like this in between my other books. So yeah, this is the second in that Heinlein Juvenile style series. I've got a couple more that I'm sort of needling with the concepts of that I'll be doing in the next few years.
Interesting. I kind of went back to an older well recently myself. I'm not sure if we've talked about it. I know we talked about the Heinlein Juvenile, I think last time you were on the show. But your book about the Heinlein Juveniles. But I recently rediscovered some of my some of the fiction that actually, it's weird. I rediscovered fiction I never read before. Let me put it that way.
Interesting.
Because
stuff that was read to you or something?
Nope. I had never experienced the story before, but I'd experienced games and other pieces of work derived from the same formula and content of this, and in some cases, using almost exactly the same tropes and style of things, because they're the old Warhammer Fantasy game, Warhammer Fantasy Battles. Yeah. Before they
I'm not much of a gamer anymore. I had to give it up in order to write. But Warhammer 40,000 is the newest one of those, right?
No. Age of Sigmar is the newest one. That's what replaced Warhammer Fantasy, because they destroyed the old world where Warhammer Fantasy was set, and then had this crazy new world. Anyway, Warhammer 40,000 is from the 80s as well.
Okay.
But I play all those games. I'm into a bunch of that stuff. But one of the things about Warhammer Fantasy is that it was heavily inspired by the heroic fantasy, like Michael Moorcock and Roger Zelazny a little bit from the 60s and 70s, right?
Yeah.
So, like, Elric and Melnibone, I've been reading those books. They're pretty fun. They're the kind of books I like. So, and I say fun by, like, everybody dies. These books are just full of death. And which makes sense because they follow on the heels of something like Conan the Barbarian, where Conan is the only guy who survives. He's the only character to survive pretty much every story.
Right. If I remember my Moorcock right, he basically did the thing where he took the Tolkien type of setting and he did the Conan type of thing in it, but he did it serious instead of fun.
Exactly. And I got interested in that from reading a bunch of interviews with Michael Moorcock in this book called Death is No Obstacle, in which he talked about how he would write those books in 4 days each. He'd type up an Elric novel in 4 days, And they were serialized in 3 or 4 parts, so he was doing a part a day a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Because he was just insane. Anyway, and actually another author friend of mine, Marissa Lingen, who's been on the show, told me that there may have been a secret to that, but it may have been chemical. Anyway, we're not going to get into that. There may have been some kind of chemical trick, but I have a similar thing going on. Because of my ADHD, I'm always on stimulants.
Moorcock in the 70s. There's no may about it.
Okay, great. I don't want to tar and feather. I don't want to cast aspersions on someone if it's not publicly known. And being that I'm of a different generation, right? I didn't want to take a guess.
Yeah, no, you got to remember the whole drug panic thing didn't really come into vogue in the mainstream until the early 1980s.
Right. Okay.
Before that, everybody did them, and back in the. Not everybody, but
lots more people. Yeah.
Especially the whole creative class. Not only did them, but had always done them. It was like in the mid-1960s, the major universities were paying students to take drugs so they could study how they worked. It wasn't until the recession of the 1970s that the politicians were like, wait, we need a culture war issue so that we can keep people's mind off of the economy. And then by the 80s, that the propaganda had worked well enough that it became the thing. And all the stuff we were subjected to as kids, don't do drugs ever. That all came out of that.
Dare to resist drugs and whatever the other thing was.
Yeah,
God, I remember Dare. I hated Dare.
My younger brothers went through Dare, and I'm like, and I was I was clean and sober kid. I was like the one. I went to all the drug parties. I was the designated driver, so I watched people get high.
Okay.
And my brothers are going through Dare, and they're bringing this material home, and I'm like, yeah, that's not how that drug works. That's not how that drug works. This is all bullshit. And they're like, wait, you're doing drugs? I'm like, no, I'm not doing drugs. I don't even like being tipsy. But I've watched a lot of people do drugs.
Well, speaking of drugs, as a heavily medicated person myself, I mean, I know a thing or two about taking stimulants, I think. But because I've been taking stimulants since I was 12 or whatever, every day.
Right.
And I guess
resist drugs unless your doctor gives them to you.
Yes, if your doctor gives them to you, get addicted to them forever and never give them up. Yeah. But anyway, God, this has been the most random episode so far, and I knew it was going to happen. That's what we signed up for, so consider this
absolutely
letting it all hang out, people. Even worse than usual. Yeah, listeners, you're here.
And for us, that's saying something.
Yeah, that really is. That really is saying something. I mean, I can talk about how, I can try to sound smart, but it's just not going to happen today. So if you don't want that, if you don't want me at my worst, you don't want maybe you should turn it into a different episode.
You can't take him at his worst. You don't deserve him at his best.
Well, that's not fair. My worst is pretty bad. I didn't want to say that because I'm like, yeah, it's a little bit up. Not what I'm trying to say here. Okay, so Dan,
yes,
what have you been writing lately? I mean, are you still writing this book as you release on Substack, or have you already written it and are editing it?
It's done. Okay. I'm currently I'm writing 4 different books right now. In the middle of developing a homestead from raw land by hand that I'm supposed to be moving on to in the next couple of weeks. It's off-grid, by the way, so I have to put in all the power and everything, and I don't have a tractor, so I get to do all of this by hand. Oh, boy.
Oh, my. Yeah.
Well, it's in a beautiful place, and the land was cheap, and I'm a writer, so mortgages are not a thing, right? You can do really
Yes.
well one year, really badly the next year, and if you've got a 30-year debt obligation, you're an idiot.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So, so this is my master plan for being able to write as long as I want, as much as I want, without having to worry about monthly debt obligations.
Pay it up front, basically. Get the land,
right.
Build your own place, pay the time up front.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this way I'm forced to get exercise, which is the thing that kills writers, is not getting up from the chair.
It's true.
So,
yeah.
So yeah, I'm building the fitness plan into my into my whole home situation. It works out great. But I'm currently writing book 10, which is going to turn out to be the final book, or at least the final book in the arc of the Clark Lantham mystery series. It's called Extinction Tango. And in this, Clark finally comes back around face to face with the conspiracy that he ran into when he was trying to locate a missing Naya Thales in book 1, and gets to find out what they're really up to. I'm also working on book 4 of my big 6-book science fiction series that I'm not releasing till it's all done. It's called alternately the Antithesis Progression, or the Cabracon Ascendancy, or the Joss Kyle Adventures, and I haven't decided which I'm going to call them finally. But it's a 6-book epic single story detailing the First Interplanetary War. Hadrian's Flight is actually set within the timeline of this series, though it's not integral to its events.
Right, so this is a huge backdrop we're talking about here for a bunch of other
huge,
for your whole. It's
huge,
like the core of a large universe, basically.
Yeah. I'm halfway through book 4. It's already about 1,200 pages.
Oh wow, yeah.
So the
you mean
whole
book
thing's
4 alone, right?
No. I mean all the whole suite.
Oh, okay.
That's
That's more reasonable. I was confused for a second there.
Yeah, the whole thing's going to wind up being about. Actually, no. Book 2 was 700 pages on its own. The whole thing's going to wind up being about 3,000 or 4,000 pages, all told.
Yikes! That's a lot of pages.
And
here I thought writing like because I'm working on this series that I think might be 10 books as well, but they're going to be short. They'll be like 45,000 to 60,000.
Oh, so you're doing it the smart way.
And yeah, I just started it though, and I'm not done with one book yet. So, hey,
I've also started work on the second Suave Rob trilogy.
Oh boy,
this one is Suave Rob's Cosmic Crusade. Suave Rob's Awesome Adventures was the first series, and that detailed Suave Rob going from being a lone wolf adrenaline junkie to leading a Justice League of his own adrenaline junkies, and deciding to go and save the asses of all the slaves in the solar system. And in this series, Suave Rob is discovering that the ass-saving business is a lot more complicated than he thought it was going to be. So it details how he copes with that, and with all the weird obligations you take on when you do things like freeing slaves.
Yeah, so he's like a political superhero type character.
He's wild. He's not political, and that's.
I mean, like in the sense of he's a political power on some level.
No, he's not.
No?
He's literally just going around.
So he's like a vigilante, basically. Yeah.
Right, so like in this series, he and his buddies go around and they stage stunt exhibitions and they bet their own freedom against the slaves.
Oh wow, that's pretty gutsy.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, how else would Suave Rob do it, right?
I guess, yeah.
So he discovers that this is not in the long term a winning strategy, and he has to come up with something else. And then the one that's absorbing most of my attention right now is called Marking the Grey Dawn, and it is a retelling of the Odyssey in post-Balkanization 2035 America.
Ooh.
About a guy who gets in hot water with the TSA on a return business trip from New York to California and has to walk home.
Oh, gosh.
He has to walk home through a balkanized United States, and it takes him years.
That's mad. That sounds like an awesome premise. Jeez. I can imagine that being a fascinating story.
I'm really pleased with how that's developing.
Okay. Yeah. But how far are you into that one?
About 40,000 words so far.
Cool. It's probably going to be a big fat book.
Yeah, it's shaping up to be 150 to 180,000.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good reasonable length for a story that sweeping, that grand in one sense. Now who's writing like the Dickens?
Yeah, well, there is that.
I guess, and especially if you put it up on Substack, then you'll really be Dickensing it.
This one might be good for that because it's so episodic. It might do really well in a forum like Substack or Vela or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's my problem, is I'm actually really pretty bad at writing small arcs. That's one thing I realized from my Vela career so far, is that I think that's one of the reasons...
Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
I was going to say, I cheated early on because I had so much... I started out writing short stories, and I had so much trouble doing novels that were coherent that I decided to steal a screenwriter's trick, and instead of doing a big plot, even though I had ideas about where the story was going, I would do everything like a Russian doll structure. So each scene has 3 acts, each chapter has 3 or 5 acts, and then each book has 3 or 5 acts, and so it's like a short story inside a short story inside a short story. And that was how I learned to do structure.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've learned... I learned it a similar way, but then I kind of just eschew looking at it while I'm actually working on the rough draft.
Yeah,
because if I'm trying to be...
When I get stuck, I'm like, wait, okay, what is the story structurally wanting at this point? And I cheat.
Yeah. I mean, if I bind myself to a structure, even one that I make up myself, I'm just like, no, this isn't going to happen. Because I'm bad at predicting where my story is going to go. I can tell where... I mean, I'm good at steering it when it does go somewhere weird. I think it goes nice places. Almost always, I'm enjoying the story more that I come up with later than the one I came up with when I'm outlining. But also, if I outline, I often feel like it's restricting me it's a mental problem, obviously. Because
no, that makes total sense to me. When my story goes in a direction that I'm like, yeah, this feels good. On my left eye, I'm looking. Oh, look at that cliff! I wonder what happens if we drive off that cliff.
Zoom,
because it's more fun that way.
Well, we're gonna have to have a wingsuit for that. We're gonna have to fly.
Right. Thelma and Louise were pikers.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
That's right.
So basically, I'm really trying to reconcile discovery writing at top speed with telling a good story, because I really do want to tell dense, fun stories that are really good and nutritious, like you said, nutritious for readers. Because I know I could just churn out crap and it would probably be okay. It would probably sell as well as the good stuff I already made. But that's not saying a whole ton. Let's be fair here, people.
You might be too young to remember, but did you ever watch a TV show called The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles?
No, I didn't watch that. I just saw the movies, the original movies.
Okay. So there was one 2-parter that was released as a movie at one point on video, and I think you can find it online. It's probably Disney Plus now, unfortunately, but I think you can find it online, called Young Indiana and the Mystery of the Blues. And in this film, Indiana Jones is in Chicago in the 1920s, and he's hanging around with Sidney Bechet and a bunch of the other blues masters in the speakeasies.
Okay.
He really wants to play the blues. And Sidney Bechet takes him under his arm and teaches him how to play jazz, because that's the first step. And it is the single best masterclass on the tension between creativity and improvisation I have ever seen. Creativity, structure, and improvisation I've ever seen.
Interesting. I guess the other thing that I've been worrying about lately, and I'm gonna that's a good recommendation. I'm definitely gonna have to check that out. Maybe when I've gotten some sleep, but one of the things I've actually been staying up late to thinking about and working on, other than the book, which I was trying to dictate all night, and I just don't have that kind of voice. I still have a voice because I chickened out, in other words. But when I'm talking about storytelling and being more effective in at reaching readers, one of the problems I have is that have you heard of this book? It's by T. Taylor, or Theodora Taylor, I think is actually her, but T. Taylor is the pen name, right? And
Probably not. I haven't heard of that name.
It's called Seven Figure Fiction, which is a big buzzword title, right? But then the subtitle is the part that's actually interesting: Universal Fantasy as a way to sell books, or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the title of the book is, but it's one I've been really interested in for a while now. I've been rereading it. It's also a really fun book, even though it's nonfiction. It's like, wow, this is actually really amusing to read. And it is mostly a description of how to deliver on romance tropes in an effective way. Because she is a romance author, and she wrote this book about how, which romance tropes work well. Basically, which of these are almost universal or very broad spectrum approaches to fiction. That's the meat of the book, but a lot of it, but the implication is that you could find this kind of approach to any kind of fiction. And yeah, tropes they can be dangerous, but they could also be really useful if you're not finding purchase like I am. I'm not really finding purchase through readership,
Yeah, no, tropes are dangerous because people use them without using them well.
Right.
Tropes are like they're basically like Tinker Toy parts off the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're pulling them off the shelf and just plunking them down without making them your own, then everything you make looks generic and everybody's seen it before. But you can't tell a story without tropes, because the tropes themselves are all encapsulated balls of meaning and implication. That's a shorthand. It's its own symbolic language. And so it is very important to know them and use them.
Right. And some of these are very specific, not even so much so that they're not even, they would never even necessarily be considered tropes. They're situations, they're characters, they're forms of relationship, that kind of thing. And I'm just trying to figure out which ones not which of those ones, because I don't write romance. It's not really fair to say I would use most of those directly, but I'm trying to kind of come up with my own list of ones that I like. That are fantasies that I would write naturally, or situations that I would write naturally that are going to appeal to readers. And it has been very challenging. I don't know. And I'm probably not going to figure it out today because I don't have enough brain power left. But
well, that's the loveliness of delirium, right? You've got no brain power, so you have no filter. Everything to sort of mix together.
Exactly. That's why I really am going to try to keep dictating, but worrying about how it works is, I guess that's going to have to be a job for future me. Along with editing this podcast. So
good luck with that one.
Oh, don't worry about it. I mean, honestly, there probably won't be a whole ton of editing involved. Let's be fair here, people. You can hear me sometimes. Yeah, exactly. It's just this. This is the kind of show that an everyday podcast would leave on the cutting room floor, but not us, not this show.
We're bringing you the shit that no one else will bother with.
Odds and ends is what we call it. Exactly. Anyway, okay, so it's not gristle though. It should be a good time for people. Come on.
Yeah. Well, I hope.
Though we are running a little low on time, to be honest.
I mean, hopefully they're laughing with us, but if they're laughing at us, at least they're still laughing, right?
I find it's impossible not to smile when you're laughing. I mean, have you noticed?
Yeah, that's true.
It's and that's where I hope people are going to take this, because Dan, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for enjoying the madness with me. And yeah.
Pleasure, Tim.
Maybe sometime I'll have to have you back in the near future to jabberjaw without so much jabberjaw. Anyway, so where was I? Oh yes, we did you did most of your plugs early, but jdsawyer.net, right?
jdsawyer.net for the main website, everydaynovelist.com for the Daily Writers podcast, venuswolf.com for the current serialized novel, and venuswolf.substack.com and jdanielsawyer.substack.com for the series on recent and future history.
And at least one of those will be in the show notes, probably jdsawyer.net, because that's the one I'm more familiar with. And and putting more than one link in the show notes is a whole can of worms. So, yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. As for this podcast, you can find someone who can actually do an outro in old episodes of the podcast. And those episodes are...
Be sure to go see Tim Niederreiter.
Yes, timneedawriter.com. I really do need to make that more of a hub, because right now it doesn't really do a whole lot. It just points to a couple of my books, because I am lazy and haven't gone back to fix it and make it reasonably modern. But mentalcellularpublications.com, and then my name, timneederreiter.com/books. That's where you can find my, books. All right.
All right.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay safe out there, and don't operate heavy machinery. That's for me. All right, take it easy, folks. Have a good one. Talk to you next week.
That tears it.